Hello and welcome to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast, a resilience podcast where we talk about all the challenging things that we're working to overcome, like anxiety, health, and relationship issues. My name is Sarah. Welcome to another edition of the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. Happy that you can join us this week. We're going to continue talking about parenting this week. We've talked about many different aspects of parenting on the podcast, including recently parenting through health challenges. Today, we're going to learn a little bit more about parenting LGBTQ children and teens from firsthand experience from our guest. Today, I'm so excited to welcome an amazing podcaster and blogger, Heather Hester. I'm a huge fan. She's done such great work. Her podcast, Just Breathe, Parenting Your LGBTQ Teen, provides great information about parenting LGBTQIA children and teens and on the challenges of the LGBTQIA community at large. I've learned so much from her and the conversations that she engages in. She also blogs at www.chrysalismama.com, and there's also great information on there for you if you are looking to learn more about the LGBTQIA community. In today's conversation, we get into hearing a little bit more about Heather's personal story, some of the challenges that she's aware of for the teens and children in the LGBTQIA community, what kind of tools that she's relied on and that she speaks to clients about, and also learning a little bit more about some of the great advice that she has for parents, family members, or allies of LGBTQIA children and teens. I hope you enjoy this episode with Heather Hester. So welcome, Heather Hester, to the podcast. I'm happy to connect with you today.
I am really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you for joining me. So why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into blogging and podcasting?
Sure. So I am I'm a writer by trade. And that's what I used to do. It feels like a million years ago at this point. And I have 4 kids. And so I was, lucky enough to be able to stay home with my kids as they were, really little and growing up. And then, when our son, Connor, who is now 21, he came out as gay when he was 16. And we were very much surprised. We did not have any idea, and kind of threw us into this world that we knew nothing about. And we didn't have any friends or family or, people that we could really talk to about it. And, we were not upset in the sense of like, oh my gosh, our kid is gay. It was more like, oh my gosh, we don't know how to support this kid. And we don't know how to, where to find information and kind of, it was just a whole new, just whirlwind of whoo. And, so at that point, I had been blogging for a while, and it was more, things to do with our family business. And so this was something very, very different from me, but writing is kind of my go-to. And so about a year into our process with Connor, as I was still, we were still really struggling, and I can certainly go into more detail later, but we were really having a tough time with a number of different things. And I thought, what, I do not want other parents and allies and people and kids to go through what we went through and to be so frustrated and to feel so isolated. And so that is when I started my website, Chrysalis Mama, and I really started it as a place to just put all the great information that I found and start just really writing about our experience and about about things that I found that were really, really great. And, so that's kind of how the blogging specific to this topic started. And then about 2.5 years ago, we were on vacation. I was reading an article about somebody that I really admired, and they were talking about their podcast. And I thought, well, this is a really, really good way to reach more people, right? To kind of let more people know that there are resources and they're not alone in this process, and just kind of a place for, there really wasn't a lot like this out there. So 2.5 months later, I launched my podcast, Just Breathe, Parenting Your LGBTQ Teen. And it has been such a fun process, a fun journey. It's been equally therapeutic for me and my family as it has been for, people who listen and, who have reached out. And I'm just so grateful that it's, one of the few things in my life that I didn't overthink. I just decided and did it. Because as you know, doing a podcast can be a little, you can get in your head about it for sure. So,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's that.
No, that's great. And your podcast is wonderful because it's a great mix of like interviews, but then also personal accounts. And so people, I think, really get to know you, but then also can learn an awful lot as well. So I love it for sure. So yeah, you're welcome. If you don't mind, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your personal experience in parenting an LGBTQIA plus teen.
That is a really good question.
A big question.
It's a very big question, yes. And I was contemplating how to make this a shorter answer. But our experience has been messy is probably the best word I can use for it. Messy, but not in a bad way. It has been an incredible learning experience for all of us. And, there are things that we just didn't know at all. Things that we never, when you first have these tiny little babies, you kind of create that movie reel in your head of this is what their life is going to look like, right? Or the things that you hope for them and the things that you wish for them. And of course, hardship is never one of the things that you hope for. Bullying is never one of the things that you hope for. Anything that's difficult, right? You kind of paint this is what I really want. And what we found, that was kind of my initial thing was oh my gosh, this movie reel that I had in my head for Connor just blew up. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have a blueprint. There wasn't a lot out there to be well, this is how you parent a gay kid, right? And this is what you need to teach them. This is what you need to share with them. And it took a lot more investigating. It took a lot more advocating and a lot more kind of being a mama bear, just in the sense of, okay, these are the things we really need to watch out for, or these are the support systems that we need in place. And so I think depending on, and it's really specific to, whether your child is gay or trans or non-binary, or, where they fall, because there are very different supports that are needed for each kid. Right. And so, our personal experience has very much been, we really had an opportunity, which is why I do talk about it, because not only did Connor come out as gay, Connor struggled with some really intense mental health struggles. He struggled with substance use and abuse. He literally checked every single box of things that you just don't ever really anticipate when you become a parent. So it was a lot of learning in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that gives you a kind of a good answer. I certainly could, talk 30 minutes on it, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially like you guys said that you weren't anticipating having, these conversations and things with him, and it sort of came as a surprise to you. And so I could see that then you're almost playing catch up, right? And trying to develop that support system. Is that fair?
That's very fair. I think that is maybe the biggest thing that we did, and we felt like for quite some time, was that we were, it wasn't like the gradual hill. It was like a 90-degree angle, that we were climbing all the time, trying to it'd be one thing that would be like, okay, we've got this, and then something else huge would come up, and so it was that sense of, for like 3 years, I was so hyper aware of everything that was going on. And not just with Connor, but with my other 3 kids too. How is all of this energy that's in the house? Because of course, each one of them could only know things to, very age appropriate levels. Right. So there was a lot of juggling and scrambling and feeling like, oh my goodness, I was on all the time and paying attention to, body language and words and just so many little things all the time. And it was okay, so, how do we talk to our gay son about sex? How do we talk to him about dating? How do we talk to him about just being safe and taking care of himself, and all of the mental health pieces around that too. So it was a lot of how-tos. How do we do this, right? Kind of packed into a really short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess, what were then some of the tools, maybe we'll jump ahead a little bit, that then you started to use to even support yourself through those conversations, but then also your child and the rest of your family during that time?
That's a really, really good question. And I appreciate that question. I am a huge believer in therapy. At that point, I had started seeing a therapist about 2 years before Connor came out, which I still, so believe in things happening for a reason. And because of that, I was in a space that I could actually be helpful to Connor, be a good support to Connor. And because I continued to see my therapist, it was kind of my place where I would just get it all out, right? Have the support, and have some direction, right? Where I could be get myself grounded again, and then be able to move forward. And over time, that became a tool that each one, my husband, all 4 of my kids have used. And it's incredibly helpful for each one of them in very different ways. I learned to meditate. I started meditating around this same time, and also doing a gratitude practice, which were both super helpful for me personally to, again, help me kind of get everything out and just kind of sit and get myself super grounded so I could actually listen to what Connor was saying, and I could be present for Connor and for Isabel, Grace, and Rowan, and for my husband. And, because everybody was experiencing this in their very own way. So really learning to get quiet and take my energy level down about 50 notches. So I went into that like state of spinning, because that is so easy for us to do, to just start, one thing leads to another. And the next thing you know, your brain is just, you cannot shut it off. So I found a lot of power in learning how to do that. A lot of strength in that. And then really just a lot of, for all of us, learning, very specific mental health tools, for each of our specific needs, as well as communication tools, which were huge, huge, huge in this process. So that has definitely been the way that we all communicate now is so vastly different than 5 years ago, even 3 years ago. So very, very cool.
And that's kind of, almost doing like a family therapy, family communication type sessions. Like, is that how you got there?
Well, actually, no, which, you'd think that we would, but we have never done the six of us together. Steve and I have done, therapy, the two of us together. And then we've done therapy with Connor, in the different, so Connor, because he was struggling at such an intense level, and this was about 6 to 8 months after he first came out to us. There were some very dangerous behaviors occurring, and once we realized everything that was going on, we realized that he needed to be out of this environment, our locate, where we live. And so he ended up being in California. We live north of Chicago, and we found a really, really good intensive therapeutic place in California that he spent 8 weeks at. And while he was there, Steve and I went out every other weekend for family therapy, group therapy, therapy with Connor. I mean, it was the things that we learned in that time like blew me away. And it was stuff that I was like, how did I not know this before?
Oh, wow.
This is such important and such basic ways to communicate with your teenager, regardless of whether they're having, any kind of mental health struggle or, anywhere LGBTQIA, they're just good communication techniques. And so that was super, super helpful. And it really gave Connor the chance as well to he just needed space, and he needed some time, and to really, he was dealing with so much self-loathing that he couldn't see anything else. And so it was really great for him to be able to kind of let go of all of that. And of course, the time he didn't realize that's what was going on. But now when he looks back and we talk about it, and he's like, that, because, truth be told, he was hot. I mean, this kid was mad that we did this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, he was a junior in high school, and he was mad. And because then after those first 8 weeks, he then spent 5 months at a therapeutic boarding school, which he didn't talk to us for the first 6 weeks he was there. So, but he now will look back and say, oh my gosh, that was so good, because I was able to like let go of all that other stuff that was going on. Right. Mm-hmm. And really be able to be like, okay, I am okay. I kind of like who I am. Maybe this is a good thing, and like peel back all of those layers. And he had really great people working with him as well. I will forever be grateful to all of these humans. So, there was a lot that a lot of tools that we learned, even in that just like short period of time. And the biggest one I will tell you, because I laugh because this is my husband's favorite tool to teach other people. And I giggle every single time that he will say it. But the ability to validate somebody else's feelings and validate what someone else is going through. We, as parents, and I'm guessing that many of you relate to this, when our child comes to us with a struggle, a problem, an issue, whatever it is, our instant reaction is to want to solve it and to be like, okay, this is what you need to do. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine, and map out the plan, right? And what we learned, which is, there are still times that it's super hard for me to do this, but learning how to just keep my mouth shut and listen, and then be able to say, okay, this is what I hear that you are saying. This is how you're feeling. This is the issue that you're dealing with right now. Is that what I'm hearing? And the minute that it is like weirdly magical, because the minute that they feel like you're listening to them and you hear what they're saying and you're not giving them a solution or a judgment or an eye roll or whatever, or, exasperation or whatever it is, then like the information that you get after that is kind of extraordinary. So it's really funny. I mean, it's one of my favorite tools now, because no matter what they're going through, I still do have that like initial, like, I hate that they're in pain. I don't want them to be in pain. But then when I can like let that go and be like, okay, like let's listen to what this really is and say it back. And it's really it's really amazing how either they're able to process through it themselves, or they are able to say, yes, I'd like your input on this, or no, I just really need for you to listen to me right now, which is helpful. So.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent tool. Absolutely. And I'm sure working, with all of your teens, 4 kids, that's, that's a lot.
There's a lot of them. Yes.
Yeah.
I am fully outnumbered. It is really nice because Connor, he'll be 22 in July, and sounds so weird to say that. Every time I say it, it sounds weird. But he is a young adult, and the conversations that we have are so amazing. And I think I would not trade a second. And we went through hell. Absolute hell. But I'm so grateful that we are where we are now, and that we have the relationship that we have now, that hands down, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's really a testament to the work and the, effort that you put in during that time into, the communication and finding help and working on yourself, that you've kind of gotten to where you are. So that's amazing.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if maybe you can share, even generally, what are some of the unique challenges that you see in terms of raising an LGBTQIA plus child or teen, just things that you've either come across yourself or from your community? Because I know you're also doing coaching as well.
I am, yes. I think that the most, and I've kind of touched a little bit on them, but I think that the most unique challenges really are that it is more difficult to find the support and the resources that your child specifically needs, because they're not quite as obvious yet. And there, on one hand, there's amazing work being done. On the other hand, there's not. So, in some ways, there's some positive direction, in other ways, not so much. But I think one of the other challenges is that you definitely have to advocate more. There are more things that you just have to kind of be aware of, as opposed to, if you were, parenting a teenager or a child, adolescent, young adult, who is not LGBTQIA. There are things that you don't really have to look for or be worried about, right? So there's this piece of, you're just on a little bit more. And I would also say learning things that are not in traditional parenting books. So kind of like I mentioned before, there's a lot out there on, general, how to parent a typically developing teenager, right? Or a typically developing adolescent. But when you add in some of these extra layers of things that are very specific to an LGBTQIA child, it's just a little more difficult to find that information that you need, the help that you need. So it's learning to like really kind of sift through. So kind of to sum all of that up, the unique challenge comes in finding the support and resources that you need and that your child needs.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. I can see that for sure. That just, well, even if you think about our child, I'm in Canada, but they go through like typical health classes and things like that, where they talk about things, and everything is very centered on straight relationships, right? And so it's, not apparent in the school system. And then you're right. So then it's like, okay, you're looking as parent to fill that gap. And I can imagine, the resources are not quite there, or depending on where you live as well, like different communities, I'm sure, have more than others.
Right. Well, and that's exactly it. And I think that it's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because my 16-year-old, sophomore in high school, and she is currently in health, and they are currently doing their sex ed unit. And I got a letter home from the teacher saying, these are the things that we're going to discuss, and I just want to make sure you're okay with it. And please make notes of things that you would like to have, be discussed. Right. And I'm looking at this thinking, okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity to say, can we perhaps add, a little bit of information here, or broaden it to, here's some other things that I would like to teach. Right. And my daughter even said, she was like, there's probably a handful of kids in the class who have been very vocal about bringing up LGBTQIA issues. Right. Which is like, it's kind of cool. I really like that they do that. And the teacher is fully on board. Now, whether or not there's any pushback, I don't know yet. Well, that remains to be seen. And certainly I think that is very, especially considering, all of the recent legislature that's being passed on what can and cannot be taught in schools. So I think this is definitely a hot topic, something to pay attention to, and something to, it's one more piece of advocating. So this is important information, right? And it's a whole piece of this greater puzzle.
We'll see what comes of it for sure. But that's interesting. That's a good anecdote from her as well. So I'm learning more and more of children coming out at younger ages. Like I know, you mentioned your son, but it seems like children are starting to notice even younger or in their tweens, whether or not they fit within the LGBTQIA plus area in terms of their sexuality. So I'm wondering if you have any advice or tools that you might recommend for parents of younger children, because just thinking about where they are in their age of development, what type of things that the parents would maybe want to direct those children to, either books or TV shows, or just even so that they can start to see people like themselves reflected back, right? Within kind of those mediums.
Yes. I love this question so much because it is very true. And it is interesting because several people that I've been working with recently have kids who are 12, 13, 14 years old who are coming out. And it is becoming more and more common, and there's I think, I mean, this is my humble opinion, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Because it's puberty's hitting. So of course, a child who is going to recognize their sexual orientation it's going to be in puberty. A child who is going to recognize their gender identity is actually going to be much younger. And so when people, are like, oh my gosh, they were 6 or they were they were 8 years old when they knew. Well, yes, they knew. They probably knew when they were 3, like it's not surprising. Mm-hmm. And they just couldn't verbalize it. Right. But it is not a surprising revelation, that kids are coming out. I mean, I think it's a testament to parents that kids are coming out younger and younger, that they feel safe enough to do that. So that's huge. That is really, really huge. As far as really good supports, there is one author in particular who I love for tweens, middle school age kids, who's been very purposeful about writing so kids can see themselves in his books. And his name is Greg Howard. He actually just published his 4th novel, I think, called The Visitors. I actually just interviewed him a couple months ago. So this is why it's all in my brain. But it is, I actually bought the series for our local middle school because it is so good. I've read them, and kids, it's just lovely. So I highly recommend those because, like you said, it's really good for our kids to be able to see themselves represented in a book. I don't have, off the top of my head, any TV shows that I would recommend. I know that there are things in the works, but not as far as, where our kids would be able to see themselves really being represented on screen and in a way that's appropriate for like an adolescent. Mm-hmm. I think that's where it gets tricky, right? I mean, there's some things that are for definitely older kids, young adults, but not so much for our younger kids. So that's a tough one. And that's an area that I know there is some movement, but nothing really out there yet. As far as for parents, if this is the very beginning of your journey, and you're just kind of like, whew, okay, what do I do? My very favorite book, for when Connor first came out, and I recommend this book all the time, it's called This Is a Book for Parents of Gay Kids. It's a really good title. And I mean, talk about picking a really great marketing title. That one is it. Yeah. So they did a fine job. But it is really good because it's very, it's the basics, and they have a website that is constantly being updated as well. So it's very up to date with information. And so I really, really like them for parents. Of course, I'm going to recommend my podcast because I think it's a really, like you said, the people that I've interviewed, I think offer such wonderful value and wonderful information and perspective on this process and on parenting an LGBTQIA kid. So those would be my biggest recommendations.
Yeah, and I think that's great because some parents maybe like to read and some are more, it's easier for them to listen to something or go on YouTube, things like that. So yeah, I think that's excellent
Right.
in terms of helping. And like you said, I have myself not seen as much in TV either. And yeah, books I think are starting to come. So that's a great book recommendation. But yeah, it's like you said, it's trying to find what is the age appropriate pieces, because there is a lot more in terms of YA for sure. But,
Yes.
Kids in that 12, 13 range, it's still, it's still PG at that point. And so you're trying to find that representation for them at that younger age.
Right.
So that's great.
Right. Exactly. I guess I would say, just thinking about it, the movie Love, Simon was very gentle, and my personal opinion is that it was not very realistic for a high school coming out. However, that being said, it was a very gentle representation of coming out. And so that movie I would recommend for younger kids to watch, because there's nothing where you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't want my kids to know that. So that just kind of came to me. I also just had another thought too, for anyone who wants something, has some faith-based concerns. The book that I would recommend for you would be, it's called Mom, I'm Gay. The author is Susan Cottrell, and it is phenomenal. So that is my recommendation there.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great one too then. Perfect. Thank you. And so I guess, we've kind of touched a little bit on this when we talked about some of the challenges and tools, but I'm wondering what you would say overall that you've kind of learned from this journey, and you can kind of reflect on many aspects, I suppose, like either your personal journey or, what you've been learning through the coaching journey, as well as the podcasting and things like that. And just kind of where you're seeing some of those valuable nuggets.
Absolutely. So a couple of things. One thing that I have found myself using a lot, especially recently, is being curious, and using curiosity as a way to overcome fear. And it's so funny because I was actually watching, and you are probably going to laugh at me, but I don't watch a lot of TV, but so many people have recommended the show Ted Lasso, which is on Apple TV, that I finally sat down and watched some episodes over the weekend. And they happened to use this quote. He happened to use this quote, be curious, not judgmental. And it's a Walt Whitman quote, which I was like, oh, yay. But I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've been saying. And I haven't been saying it so eloquently, but that's exactly it. And I think when we can allow ourselves to just be curious about, whether it's what our child is experiencing or what somebody else's child or family or, parent is experiencing, it allows us to kind of two things. It does definitely take the fear down a few notches. It also allows for some space to really be able to process whatever information is coming. So I love that one. And I do use that a lot. I've also, this is another one that I use. I think I actually named a podcast episode this, to embrace the messiness. And because this is messy, life is messy. Parenting is messy. This is just can be a little messier at times. And so instead of being, once I was able to not be afraid of the mess and to not try to resist the mess or to fix the mess, and just to be like, okay, this is part of this. And it can actually be kind of fun or interesting or beautiful in some ways, right? That has been incredibly helpful for me, for people that I work with, for my kids. I mean, all of us, when it's kind of that allowing yourself to be imperfect, because so many of us think, oh my gosh, I have to be perfect. I have to do this. I have to do this. And when you kind of cut yourself some slack and are like, well, no, imperfect is okay. I can be messy sometimes, and that's okay. It just really, I think, helps with everything. And then I would say the third big lesson for me is or was breaking the cycle. And for me, one of the cycles that I was able to break was a cycle of binary parenting. And I mean that in the way of like, it's either right or wrong, right? It's this or this, that there's always just two options for everything. And being able to break away from that and see things in a very different way has been a huge lesson for me. And again, and for my family. And I would say, obviously mainly for my husband and I, because our kids are kids and they get to have the benefits of us breaking that cycle, which is good. So those would be my three big lessons that I would share.
No, those are great. And I can totally see when you talk about embracing the messiness and being curious, like that's really where that learning piece comes in, right? Like kind of where you start to then really pick up a lot of information and roll with it. So that sounds really great.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
So I guess before we wrap up, I guess I just, beyond sort of your learnings, is there any last important advice that you'd want to give to parents or even extended family members of LGBTQIA plus teens and children that maybe want to be supportive and aren't really sure how to start?
Yes. Again, another very good question. And I think my two biggest pieces of advice that I learned along the way are one, to listen, to not panic and feel like, oh my gosh, I need to solve this, whatever's going on, or I need to have something to say, or, whatever your kind of gut reaction is, to just listen to what your kids are saying to you and the way that they're saying it to you. And then the second thing is, and I know this is going to sound so cliche, but I really mean it in the most literal sense, which is to breathe. Every person, when they get panicked or upset or, frustrated, we hold our breath or our breathing gets really fast. And that is exactly why I named my podcast what I did, because whenever you can just take that breath and focus on it for a minute and realize your kid's not broken, there's nothing wrong with them, and there's nothing wrong with you or your parenting, and to realize that they're just expressing who they authentically are, that would be, that's a beautiful thing. And so just to kind of breathe through that whenever something comes up that you're not quite sure what to do with it, just take a breath.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And your podcast always sort of feels like that. Like the title is perfect. And then you've got such a soothing, a calming demeanor about the way that you go through everything. So I think it's definitely fitting.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
You're welcome.
Quick funny story. My youngest, who is now 14, when he first heard the podcast, he was like, Mom, why don't you sound like that all the time? I was like, well, first, I didn't actually realize that I was really like kind of making my voice sound different, but I do realize that now because I get in the space of like, I feel super calm. So that's what I kind of am conveying. But I had to laugh because I was like, well, because I don't feel like that all the time.
Yeah. Just for the 45 minutes on the podcast.
Exactly. Rowan, do your homework. Is not that effective,
It's too calm. Yeah.
It's way too calm. It is not going to inspire you to get your homework done. So
that's great. Yes, there's a time and place. You're right. But for parents that need that place, yeah, your podcast is perfect for that few moments of the day. So, how can listeners find out more? We've talked a little bit about it, but thinking of your social media as well as your online presence, and then, of course, the podcast.
Absolutely. Yes. So my podcast again is Just Breathe, Parenting Your LGBTQ Teen. And my website is chrysalismama.com, chrysalis like the butterfly cocoon. And then my social, I'm on all socials. So Facebook and Instagram are both Chrysalis Mama, and Twitter is Chrysalis Mama 1. So all right. Easy to remember. Yes.
Perfect. Yes. I will link up to those so that people can click away and then hopefully be able to connect with you a little bit further through there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I do coaching. I do one-on-one coaching and I do group coaching. So I am always happy to hear from people and answer questions and do whatever I can do.
That's great. No, that's wonderful. So thank you so much for your time today. I think this has been so helpful. And of course, if people want to learn more, they can connect with you and go over to your podcast as well. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much, Heather.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Are you interested in having a published author speak in your classroom or at your community event? I'd be interested in speaking about my new novel, Pendulum by S.E. German, the writing process, mental health, pandas, pans, podcasting, and more. Contact me at reallifeprojectco@gmail.com for both in-person and online bookings. Thank you so much to Heather Hester for her time today. I learned so much from her. I really appreciate her ability to share not only things that she's learned, but then what she's been putting together as a coach in terms of supporting parents and supporting allies and teachers and everyone working with the LGBTQIA plus community in understanding how to best support this community and all of our young people that are part of it. I really enjoy her podcast, Just Breathe. I highly recommend it. Again, whether you're listening as a parent or an ally of this community, it's got some amazing information. And also, a parent of any teen could really benefit a lot from a lot of the conversations. There's one in particular that focuses on suicide that I listened to that had such tangible, real steps in terms of some of the interviews that she's been working through. And I really recommend it in that way. If you're also looking to get a hold of Heather to talk more, she's on Instagram at chrysalismama. Also, chrysalismama.com is another great way to find her. And then, as I mentioned, her podcast, Just Breathe. So I hope that you learned as much as I did from this episode and that you've come away with some great pointers and that you really appreciated the time with Heather as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening this week. And again, if you have any suggestions that you'd like to see in terms of the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast, please feel free to reach out to me, best through Instagram, likely at Sarah Lady Gluten. I'm always happy to hear what you're interested to learn more about. Thanks again for listening and have a great week. Have you read my novel Pendulum by S.E. German yet? If not, what are you waiting for? And if you have, I would love to hear from you. If you don't know about Pendulum, it's a heartwarming story about a young boy who starts to experience neuropsychiatric symptoms after an infection. We follow the boy as he goes through many regular, real middle grade issues like moving, having a crush, playing sports, also while experiencing neuropsychiatric symptoms like anxiety, OCD, tics, panic attacks, and more. If you're interested in checking out Pendulum by S.E. German, it is available through Amazon worldwide, where you can even see a preview of the book, or you can listen to Chapter 1, which is on episode 64 of the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. I hope you enjoy the novel, and thanks for your support. Thank you for listening to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. Please keep in mind, this podcast is not intended to be medical or professional advice. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can follow me on social media, Instagram and TikTok at Sarah Lady Gluten, or Facebook, Sarah_gluten-free lady. You can also visit my website, which includes author information, speaking information, and more info on the podcast at www.se-german.com. If you like the podcast, please feel free to review the podcast on your favorite platform and also subscribe, because it means that it will show up for you every week on your favorite podcast platform. Also, we've just started to have the ability to support the podcast. You can find this link in my Instagram bio or visit Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/learning to slay the beasts. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.